Where does governance fail, and who the heck put this MySpace problem slide here?
It's my slide, and I put that on there.
Clearly, I did not review these as thoroughly as I needed. All right, everybody, welcome to Sympraxis, March 18th, 2026. Today, we're going to do Intranet Governance Site. We have all but Todd here, so I have no one to make fun of. It's really a sad day.
Now, we agreed we can make fun of him when he's not here.
That's true. We did say that. It just doesn't feel the same in my heart. All right, so we're going to do Intranet Governance Site. Where governance fails, what is a governance site, what goes inside of it, how to structure it, how to maintain it, how to use it, how to integrate with it, all the things around governance sites. So let's get started quickly, starting off with Mark. Where does governance fail, and who the heck put this MySpace problem slide here?
It's my slide, and I put that on there.
Clearly, I did not review these as thoroughly as I needed to.
One of the things we try to avoid is what I think of as the MySpace problem, right? You just throw everything you want on the slide or on the site, and people come there and they don't know how to find anything, and it doesn't make any sense, and there's no consistency, and blah blah blah, right? So that's where governance fails, is where there's no sort of guardrails, no boundaries, no rules, and you end up with a lack of follow through, a lack of training, a lack of consistency. End users love consistency. They don't want to do it themselves, but they want it to be done for them. And that leads to reliability. So when people need to find something, they can find it. If you don't do anything with governance, you end up with really confused users. They don't know where to go. They don't know how anything is organized. They don't know what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. It's very helpful for everybody to have some sort of governance, or else you will have something like the MySpace problem. And we actually have seen this in SharePoint installations that we've gone into, where pictures of people's cats are on the finance site. If that's your corporate culture, or you work at the ASPCA, then the cat should be there. But you want to make sure that it's not just somebody's decision because they feel like doing it. So it can be a disaster, but we're going to talk through how to keep that from happening.
Good example. All right, so let's move on to what is a governance site. Patrick, can you explain this for everyone?
Thing. In short, a governance site is a training learning tool that we often mention to a lot of our clients, and it contains how-to guides, articles on how to do things, tutorials, sometimes with videos on how to build and maintain consistency across all your sites. What this helps us do is, as Mark was just talking about in some ways, lower the cognitive load of your users. When your sites are all set up, at least your home pages, in a similar fashion, when your navigation looks similar, people don't have to think about where to go to find that new updated content. It's front and center, it's where it should be. And then, it kind of shows us how to build out those pages. It can also aid in accessibility of the content and ease in which they can find it in terms of, as I was just saying, the look and feel of the navigation and the home pages. So it's essentially a tool to be used for your site owners to help make them SharePoint gurus within your organizations. And we'll get into what it entails in a few.
Okay, we have some visualizations, I think.
Yes. So this is one, just kind of a homepage of a SharePoint guidance site that we do a lot. Obviously, for us, this has a similar looking feel to an organization's intranet sites. So your site owners already know how they use it. We use things like quick links for the key elements, how to build a page, how navigation works, things like that. That's going to be different for every organization depending on what those goals are, how technical literate their users are, and things like that. But one thing I think that, we kind of push a little bit, and I think I know personally I've been pushing it a little bit more, is the news web part. So, if you're getting the same question over and over again about how to do things, like what's the better practice for copy and paste, make it a news article, put it on the site. This then becomes accessible to any of your users who are coming to build out their sites and figure things out. The other thing that I think that we could probably add in more here as news would be things like changes that are happening to lists and libraries that are mentioned in the admin center message section. Those are things that not a lot of people see. And this is a perfect opportunity to get those changes out front and center to the people who are actually be using it, at least on those who are building out the sites and maintaining them. So I think, putting in some of those message center, changes here just is another avenue of making sure that we're communicating out information so people are a little less surprised when they happen.
Cool. What about this one? Anything extra we want to add?
Yeah, again, keeping in mind our heuristics and our styling of our pages, having a section that is a little bit more specific to some of the more detailed information for working on the internet, how to set up your information architecture, how to install images and videos on a page, navigation, news. Some of this is pretty basic, but it is still really important to have out there for people to find. Now, when you say, oh, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. Nope, go ahead, finish.
I was just gonna say, so if you happen to click on the news, you get brought to a page working with news. There's a brief description. There's some how-to guides. And then we have related content. Now, the how-to guides, one thing that we've done is tie this to either support or learn.microsoft.gov. What this allows us to do is as Microsoft updates that content on their sites, you don't have to worry about doing it on your governance site. It's already done for you. It's brilliant, assuming Microsoft updates it in an appropriate way.
Assuming, yes. Yeah, these are all like really great ideas. One of the things that's going on in the chat is a discussion over a more old school way of doing things, which is to have a governance document. And there's some joking going around the date not changing in 5 years. And of course, things are not getting updated. But I think it's well, that's better than nothing. I think the thing that we're sort of saying here is we're distributing that knowledge that's sort of locked into that document out into news articles and links and other things that are a little more actionable, a little bit more findable for people than sort of I have to go into that document and read the whole thing, which can be rather daunting. So cool. All right, and moving on. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
I just had one more thing about that, which was, the other thing I tried to do is put in related information. So, this is working with news, but, maybe people aren't sure how to put in the page or the news web part. So there's a link to the page guidelines, and this is just PnP search, publishing intranet news, publishing site news. There's different ways to kind of get that information. So we're contextualizing all of this, putting it in one spot. So maybe someone doesn't realize, there's something else related that they can look at it as well.
Okay, that's a great point. So that's that whole related content stuff on the right-hand side. Right. Got it. Cool. All right, moving on. Carrie, what goes into our governance site?
Yeah, so a lot of the things Patrick just mentioned in terms of like tutorials and articles and things like that. But what I think is also helpful is to think about like what it is you actually need to govern, like versus the guidance that you need to provide, right? So just kind of prioritizing the content that you need to have out there. And normally this isn't everything, right? Like we don't want to try to boil the ocean here, but if we can focus on the things that cause risk or inefficiencies in your environment or just confusion amongst your users, that's probably a good place to start for the kind of content that you want to put in there. And so some examples of that are naming conventions, whether that's site URLs or your files, any legal and compliancy kind of things where there could be some issues or exposure would be another good place to start in terms of what you would want to have on the site. Policies, for example, might be across departments, and so you may need some shared guidance or rules around how you manage those policies and when they're updated and where they're stored and what does it mean if you put it here, where is it going to show over here, perhaps in your policy center. So knowing those kind of things, I think, are super important. And then anything I would say permission sharing related is going to be one of your sort of core governance must-haves. And this can vary, of course, like Patrick said, from site to site and company to company, but these typically, I think, are the big ones that we want to make sure that we're kind of aligning on. Also branding and fonts and colors and templates and things like that. That's also something pretty important. So just deciding what you want to govern versus what you want to provide guidance and be a little more flexible in, I think is helpful. And that's sort of where the next ones come in, which is your better practices and your how-to. And sort of how Patrick showed on the other slide, it's nice to kind of break these up, sort of like broader conceptual things like whether you should use a team site or a communication site or how to set up your navigation and things like that versus some of the more detailed how-to stuff, which we saw on that page was sort of contextually all in the same spot. So I think that those are super important for your intranet governance. And again, having those sort of how-to step-by-steps as your next jumping point once you sort of understand the concept of what you're trying to do and having it in that related content area is going to be helpful. So yeah.
Cool. Structure?
Yeah, so, and dusting off the binder on the shelf kind of thing, like, you know, we're trying to get away from that, of course, but, you know, just trying to align this whole idea of an intranet governance being a training and learning tool, right? A good way to do that is to have a governance site and kind of how we've been talking about it. And one of the ways to sort of get this information across and to convey all these things is just to use these topic pages on your site. It's a nice way, it can be engaging the way you're displaying the content, and also you can tag your pages with metadata. So you can now start to group things that are related, and then, you know, perhaps that they're easier to surface in other places automatically later because you've given them some structure and some, you know, kind of boundaries. So as topics overlap, I think this is sometimes helpful to know what they relate to, and it could be an intersection of a couple different things. And as far as organizing this content on your site, I've seen this a lot of different ways. I haven't quite landed on what my favorite is yet, because we've seen content organized by tool, and you know, you're looking at a mega menu of like Teams. This is Teams related things. This is SharePoint related things. Maybe this is, you know, OneNote meeting kind of stuff. And also by role, right? Am I a site owner? What are the things I need to know? And all of that is super helpful. But I feel like the task-oriented way of looking at this is super, super helpful, because you may not know like the tool that you need. You may not know if you're an owner or a member or what you have access to do, but you do know you need to do something. And so knowing what that task is and organizing it in that way, I feel sometimes is very helpful.
Yeah, doesn't that kind of rely on what that organization would prioritize, though? So maybe you don't have a favorite more because every organization ends up being different in their needs. Like that feels true.
Yeah,
right?
I think we've been talking a little bit in the chat about this. I mean, I think you always have to right size any of this to the organization you're working with. You know, if you're working with an organization that's very document centric, you tend to make more documents. You know, if they're at a low maturity level, you're not writing governance for Copilot because they probably aren't using Copilot. You know, it's not just the content, but the structure of the content and the formatting of the content. And we always use Emily Mancini's old company as an example where they had a corporate voice. Everything was named for birds. So birds were pervasive in their governance. Right. Sounds crazy, but this stuff varies.
Yeah.
Their thing is.
Yep, totally agree. And like I said, I've seen it organized and set up a couple of different ways. And to your point, in some organizations, like one of a recent project that I had, they were very savvy, and so they They knew this was a Teams thing. They knew this was SharePoint. They knew this was something different. So we organized things in a way that sort of aligned with their like sort of, you know, maturity model, if you will. So yeah, it does definitely depend. But I do feel like having a task, like if you know what your task is, having it super clear of what you're trying to do in a navigation or on a page title is definitely super helpful. And then the last thing here is just learning pathways. So, and I know, Derek, I think you're going to talk more about this as well, but this is just another layer of training that you can sort of incorporate into your governance site, using some formal Microsoft learning and then sort of blending or like combining it with any of your custom stuff is also going to be important to include where you can.
Love it. Love a learning pathways mention. All right, Mark, how do we implement a successful governance site?
Mark? Me? No.
Yes, you.
Oh,
pay attention.
So, what? You know, what I think one important thing is you always have to have some sort of governing body, steering committee, something. I mean, you'll name it what makes sense for your organization. It could just be the intranet owner who is deciding what all the governance is, but you want to make sure that there is an authority, somebody who can break those ties, someone who can say, no, you can't have cats on your finance site, somebody who has both the responsibility and the authority to make these decisions, because it's going to, in a large organization, is going to affect a lot of people. You want to have clear training. You want to have SharePoint super users. SharePoint is a collaboration platform, first and foremost. So you tend to want to use the tools that it gives and Teams gives to build communities of people who do similar things. One of the first things we tend to do when we start building an intranet site is we build a site for the site owners to collaborate in. So that they're sort of almost crowdsourcing the governance together, because things evolve as they learn how things work. So that also feeds into this sort of train the trainer mentality. It's not just that one person who can explain governance to everybody, even if one person is making those decisions. You want a clear and consistent set of people who can talk to people about, you know, what the approach is, how it ought to work, where they might be breaking some rule. I think it's a lot. If things go well, it's a lot less about telling people that they're doing something wrong and helping them do things right. And so, you know, governance is not that big binder with which you hit people in the head. It's a common understanding, a shared mental model. Training the trainer, having a large number of people who actually understand it and have internalized it, means it's going to be more successful. You have some analytic tools in the platform itself that you can use to sort of track whether or not your governance is working. You have site analytics. You can see if people are actually visiting a site. If they're not visiting at all, maybe there's a content problem. Maybe the navigation isn't working. That's, you know, those things are probably something that you've written some or thought about some governance for, and maybe you had a miss. We love both Orchestry and ShareGate. We're partners with both because they give you extended tools that help you think about these things in more sophisticated ways and take action in more sophisticated ways than what you get out of the box with Microsoft. Microsoft is building a bunch more sophisticated tools like lifecycle management, but they tend to reserve it for the admins, which it helps, but it's not necessarily the right people to be making those decisions. And that's why Orchestry and ShareGate can really help. It helps to move it more toward the people who actually own the content and know what it is. And then you can you of course want to personalize all of this for how your organization works. You might have 3 business units where nobody ever talks to each other across those business units. You might have a finance department that's also HR, that's also, you know, whatever. I mean, we've seen every kind of variation under the sun. So you want to make sure that you're organizing your content, you're thinking about this whole approach based on how your organization is structured, how it's going to be most successful. And away we go.
Excellent. All right, personalization, Patrick.
Speaking of personalization, I think we've talked about this kind of throughout on some of these slides. Carrie certainly brought it up, and Mark just mentioned it as well. This isn't just about kind of better practices of broader SharePoint use and where it should be used. But you can also include those organizational information in there, definitions of key content types. I think this is one that is key that often gets missed. What makes a policy a policy? What is that document look like, or what does that page look like? Does it need approval once a year or things like that? What's the difference between a how-to document and a procedure document? This is one that we see constantly where those are swapped in and out, but having a definition of what that term means just helps your users better comprehend what they're looking at. Same things with forms and checklists. That's another one I think that gets confused a lot. They'll say, call it a checklist because you check something off, but in actuality, isn't it really a form? It's just a different type of form. But having a standardized terminology so people understand that when they say form, what that means. I have a client now where the term governance is that word. We couldn't call the governance site governance because governance to them is very specific to legal things. So we had to swap that out and change it out, but it's something you can put on the site so people understand what those terms mean. The other way you can audience target, or you can personalize it, is by audience targeting it. More than just explaining what audience targeting is, how and when to use it. You can audience target the content on your governance site as well, to site owners versus site members. Granted, I don't necessarily think there's a lot of difference there, but one area would be permissioning. Your site owners can permission where your site members can't. So maybe those pages are just audience targeted to them, lowers the cognitive load to your site members. They don't even question it because they don't, see it. Certainly if they search for it, it'll come up for them, but it's just one more way to help our users get access to that information.
Yep, that's a great point. All right, usability guidelines.
This one I threw in here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I could spend an entire Sympraxis talking about usability and the guidelines around it. But I did want to mention it here because I think that our governance and guidance sites tackle a lot of these, and it's a great spot to kind of talk about them to our users, to get them thinking more about a pretty page or how things work. I put a couple on this slide just to touch base on, and again, these are from Nielsen Norman's group. They have 10 usability heuristics to kind of follow when it comes to design, things just to think about to aid how users find information. Number 4 is consistency and standards. Our guideline or governance site, we're helping enforce those consistency and standards across the sites. We're being clear what those things are, whether it's naming conventions or how your home pages should look. Recognition rather than recall. This falls into a big part of it because we're minimizing the user's memory load because the pages look the same as the intranet. So they're familiar with it. They know where to go to start looking for that information. It's the same design, so they know how to follow it. Aesthetic and minimal design. We're connecting topics with similar topics for ease of findability and connection. When we look at the pages for news, for instance, where we had the how-to documents, we also had related pages. So we're making those connections for them. So people don't have to think, where do I have to go and find that? It's right there, it's presented for them. And of course, this one is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, your guidance governance site is heuristic 10. Help in documentation. We're providing that information for them right front and center to help them build their pages, maintain them, keep them current, providing that information for, changes that are coming to our lists and libraries and teams, et cetera. I know Mark parted that out in the chat as well. Yes, it is great to have governance for your communication sites, but I would argue that you do need some, at least minimum, on your team sites as well, because it's all about helping people find information in a faster way, and that can live on your governance site. It may not be as strict as your communication sites. I agree with that. I think team sites need to be a little bit more freeform, but the overall look, the overall consistency should be there.
Cool. Those are a good list of things. And the chat is just blowing up with deeper dives on everything we're talking about. I cannot possibly cover them all, so I'm not going to try. But if you're watching this later, you should join us live so you can be part of this crazy chat that's going on. All right, Derek, go ahead. Hit the learning pathways button.
All right. So, we do love a good learning pathways shout out. And this is something that I use a lot in my governance sites, both in terms of governance and training. But what we can do specifically around governance is create playlists and tailored learning paths specifically for our content authors or our site owners or our site users. It lets us bring lots of different information together into one course, if you will. When we talk about learning pathways, we talk a lot about snackable learning or bite-sized learning. And I think that this is the kind of thing that you can take for your site owners, say if they're learning, if they need to know how to manage permissions in their site. You can pull in content that you've created, custom content, or you can pull in content from learn.microsoft.com and bring it all together into one thing that sort of gives you a step-by-step for how to do something. It also lets you use, create training content so that, maybe your finance folks need Excel-based, information about Excel. So you can pull Excel-based training directly contextually into the team site that they're working in. And always, you can create those custom playlists really fine-tuned and tailored to your governance model.
Oh, sorry. I'm just laughing over all the what's a printer things that are coming through. They're fantastic.
I'm trying not to laugh while I'm talking. So
exactly. The Rage Against the Machine one.
There's nothing wrong with chuckling under your breath while you're speaking, Derek. So another thing we talked about above, one of the things that happens in a lot of tenants is nobody knows when new stuff is coming. The admins are the ones who hear about that. It comes into the message center. They either don't read it or they don't communicate it. I would say I'd see about 50-50 that they read it, and about 10% of them actually communicate this stuff out. It's just the way it seems to work. So there's this cool thing in the admin center where you can sync message center messages into a planner plan. And then you can embed that plan in your governance center if you wanted to do that. So then people would be able to see, well, there's a new, whatever we call that top part of the document libraries that we're all struggling with coming soon. That just showed up in most of my clients' tenants, and they said, why is this broken? What the hell just happened? Because no one explained it to them. So part of your governance site is a way to communicate these changes ahead of the time that they're coming. So look into this capability to get that information out of the admin world and into the user world.
And to expand on that, you wouldn't even need to necessarily put it in your governance site. You could put it into a team site of people that are in charge of your governance site, yep. And they could use that to sort of triage what they might need to write news articles on, or governance, update their governance on, or whatever that might be. So it depends, again, and we've been sort of constantly talking about this, it depends on your organization and what works for you. A more mature or a larger organization, or an organization with a lot more bureaucracy and structure might want to do what I suggested, but some other organizations might be open and free-flowing enough that just surfacing those service changes on the governance site would be a great way to handle it. So
we've worked with some real nerd organizations where they want to know that the X59 certificates are expiring, or whatever that has, whatever those messages are that make no sense to me. So you got to right size it to everybody. That's why I say here there's some curation that you might want to do in order to make sure that people are getting the information they need.
I think
it's making me think. Go ahead, Mark Cashman. Go.
It's just a quick thought. If you aren't if you don't have access to the message center or you haven't seen a message center post in a while, it's perfectly primed to be, if something triggers like that's important to our organization, it's already written a little bit like a news article. Why does this matter? What are the implications? Even images come with it. It's a really nice method that they're doing, even if it comes late or it feels off or whatever. It is a set of information that's already almost structured for you to be able to lift and put it for the ones that relate. I think it at least would relate to some of the things that everybody mentioned before about communicating out what the changes are. These are kind of primed and ready for you to take.
Cool. Awesome. The thing I was going to add was I think then your governance site would have to be a communication site to surface the plan. Can the planner web part surface a plan from a different team or site or anything like that? I mean, because you've got a security sort of boundary there. Anyway,
there are ways
something
to solve
think
that
about.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah, something to think about. All right, so we got some resources here. And then coming up, April 1st, April Fool's Day, we're going to talk about some Microsoft 365 hidden gems. And so you can probably guess what that might be about if it's April 1st. So join us for that one. And then happening in the community, Mark and Mark, Julie, Derek, and Carrie are all going to be at the Microsoft 365 Community Conference. That's in Orlando. We have a discount code if you'd like to join us there. The European Collaboration Summit comes hot on its heels. That's in Cologne, Germany. A bunch of us will be over there. Techorama is where Todd's going to be at. And then TechCon 365 in Chicago. Julie, Mark, Derek, Patrick, and Mark are all going to be there. That's in June. And just so everyone knows, if you're listening to this, the call for speakers and call for sponsors for Collab Days New England, which is the conference that we help run in the fall, is now open. You can get more information on that at collabdaysne.org. And that will get you where you need to go. All right, this was an awesome session. Thanks everybody joining us live, and we will see you again on April 1st.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Sympraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.